Shabbat Shalom. Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, was on Tuesday, and our Israel Committee has arranged a special oneg after services celebrating Israel's 66th year. I hope that you can all join us downstairs. Never take Israel for granted, even those of you who were born after 1948 and never knew a world without a Jewish state. Never take Israel for granted, even those of you who were born after 1967. I remember that period. I was 8 years old, and I can't shake the memories of my mother listening to radio all day in Bethesda, Maryland, crying and worrying. It looked like it might be the end of the Zionist experiment, another Jewish catastrophe, a generation after the Holocaust, taking with it the remnants of my mother's family that had escaped the clutches of Hitler and Stalin and made it to the shores of the Promised Land. Never take Jewish power for granted. Even for those of you who were born in the 1970s and the 1980s and thereafter, and never knew a world where Jews were powerless to protect themselves. I'm convinced that this partially explains some of Western Europe's antipathy to Israel. They're used to seeing Jews in another way. They're not used to seeing Jewish fighter pilots, and it's disorienting for them. They now lump Israel together with their colonial past. And for those of you who have never known a world of Jewish powerlessness, never apologize. Never, ever apologize for Israel's military and political power. We should apologize for the improper use of power, and we should study the very severe restrictions on the use of force in Jewish law and in contemporary law and ethics. But don't forget 2,000 years of Jewish powerlessness. You've grown up comfortably in a world where there is a Jewish state and a country that respects, protects, and embraces Jews. There was anti-Semitism here, but not state-sponsored anti-Semitism. There were no gas chambers and no pogroms. Our lives here are the exception, not the rule. Study your own history and study other people's history. Jewish powerlessness has been a catastrophe for our people. The question is not, is it better to be weak? Rather, the question is how to be both strong and just. There is no glory in being weak. There is no glory in being slaughtered. There is no glory in turning the other cheek as violence rains down upon you. Make no mistake, were it not for the hard power of the Israel Defense Forces and the soft power of Israel's diplomacy, the fate of the Jews in Israel would be as the fate of the Kurds in Turkey and Iraq, the fate of the Syrians in Aleppo, and the fate of the Palestinians in Hamas-run Gaza. We know this. We don't even have to speculate or guess. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, they have told us precisely what they would do if they only could do what they wanted to do. I'm disappointed that American Jews are increasingly polarized on Israel. I'm disappointed that we can no longer take for granted that Israel be a unifying force in the Jewish community. I was disappointed to see that J Street's application to join the Conference of Presidents was rejected. Are we so fearful of dialogue and dissent? Are we so polarized that we cannot maintain a big Jewish tent and tolerate those of differing opinions? Let me spend a few moments on this. Inside the Jewish Beltway spat. I know this world well. I was a member of the Conference of Presidents for 12 years. Its full name is the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. It has something like 55 American Jewish organizations that are members or adjunct members. But the little secret that insiders know well is that in reality, Most of these so-called major American Jewish organizations are really minor American Jewish organizations. But how would it look if the entity would be called the Conference of Presidents of some major American Jewish organizations and mostly minor American Jewish organizations? Would you want to be a part of that? And it was many minor American Jewish organizations that voted against J Street. And they each have one vote, irrespective of size. Major American Jewish organizations, like the Reform Movement, the Conservative Movement, the Anti-Defamation League, and the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, voted in favor. Not necessarily because they agree with J Street on everything or even many things, but because we believe in a big tent, and J Street belongs inside the tent. Even from a pragmatic perspective, to paraphrase Lyndon Johnson, it's better to have as many pro-Israel organizations inside the tent spitting out than outside the tent spitting in. Johnson, by the way, as was his nature, was much more crude. There is unlikely to be peace between Israel and the Palestinians anytime soon. This is actually one of my many disagreements with J Street. That gives the impression that it's in Israel's power to bring peace. Just one more last thing that Israel can do that will persuade the Palestinians, the Iranians, the Syrians, the Saudis to embrace Israel as an authentic component of the Middle East. There are reasons why the Palestinians have not once, never, ever, not once accepted a two-state offer, even by the most liberal of Israeli governments. It's not a few apartment complexes in East Jerusalem that will remain in Israel anyway if there were ever to be a peace accord. Rather, the Palestinians do not wish to end the conflict. They have already been offered 96% of the territory with one-to-one land swaps covering the remaining 4%. They already have all of Gaza. They have already been offered self-government, independence, resolution of the Palestinian refugee problem, tens of billions of dollars of foreign investments. You need to ask yourselves, is this the behavior of a people that wants independence? Really? You do not need a PhD in international relations. Common sense will do. They could have had a state in 1947 and rejected it. They could have had a state in 1967 and rejected it. Legendary Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban said after that war, it was the first war in history where the victors sued for peace and the vanquished called for unconditional surrender. They could have had a state in 2000 and rejected it. They could have had a state in 2008 and rejected it. And thus the real question is not whether we can reach peace between Israelis and Palestinians in the next decade. The real question is whether we can reach peace with ourselves. Will Israel increasingly become a source of contention, bitterness, and alienation within the American Jewish community? Or can we unite around basic principles and parameters? I believe in a big pro-Israel tent. I'm not eager to cast out of our tent swaths of American Jews. We are small enough as it is. Israel's predicament is precarious enough as it is. Our objective should be to have as many Jews as possible inside the pro-Israel tent speaking out rather than outside the pro-Israel tent speaking in. I personally am a Zionist. And in that I follow good footsteps here in the synagogue. Rabbi Stephen Weiss, who founded this congregation, was a Zionist. In fact, he was the leader of American Zionism in the years leading up to the creation of the Jewish state. Our synagogue, too, is on record in our Constitution as committed to Zionist principles. But I'm not eager to quarrel with fellow Jews about definitions. If the word Zion is too much for some, a word used over 150 times in the Bible to describe the connection between the Jews and the land of Israel, and they describe themselves as pro-Israel, a word used over 2,500 times in the Bible, I'm okay with that. J Street defines itself as pro-Israel. And when I interviewed its executive head, Jeremy Ben-Ami, here on the Bema 2 years ago, you remember that? I asked him, and he said he was a Zionist. So why the hesitation? Why the fear? J Street is part and parcel of us, and it is the umbrella's organization discredit that J Street is rejected. We should embrace pluralism and healthy debate and dissent. I do, however, have red lines. Not everything is acceptable to me. If Jews, in the name of Judaism and Jewish values, advocate boycotting Israel, if they lobby for UN and international sanctions against Israel, if they propose divestments, if they pressure Congress to reduce foreign aid, then, from my perspective, they are outside the pro-Israel tent, and we must oppose them with everything we have. First, because these views are marginal in the Jewish community. Second, because these views threaten the very existence of Israel. I draw the line at Israel's right or capacity to defend itself. And third, these views are morally outrageous, especially if you express them in the name of the Jewish people, not in my name. Anti-democratic regimes are boycotted, not democracies. Syria should be sanctioned, not Israel. Divest from China if you care about human rights, not Israel. Stop buying Russian oil, not SodaStream. Turkey has killed thousands of Kurds in the past 5 years and still occupies a third of Cyprus. I don't see any flotillas anchoring in Ankara. Where are the resolutions in the Security Council? Where is even a tenth of the outrage that is poured on Israel? It's reflective of the mass confusion of our era, when we allow a small democracy fighting for its life in the world's worst neighborhood to be savaged as if it were an anti-democratic dictatorship, savaged by forces who themselves are anti-democratic and who perversely appropriate the very language of human rights that we progressives have developed over centuries. I wish we could have more unity in the American Jewish community. I wish we would not confuse unity with uniformity. We should not aspire to uniformity. This has never been the goal or the character of the Jewish people. We're stronger in diversity. I wish that we could all focus on the miracle that this week represents. We Jews are engaged in a creative endeavor the likes of which have not been seen in the whole history of mankind. The rebirth and rehabilitation of a people that had been uprooted and scattered to the wind. After 2,000 years of wandering, the Jews have reestablished our path among the ways of the living nations of the world. The Jewish state is the Jewish people's supreme creation of our era. Its very establishment bears witness that the Jewish people lives. And I end with a prayer in our Siddur for the state of Israel. Avinu Shebashamayim, O Heavenly One, protector and redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield her beneath the wings of your love, spread over her your canopy of peace. establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen.